Welcome to Star Wars Music Minute, where we celebrate the music and sound of Star Wars 5 cinematic minutes at a time. I'm Chrysanthi Tan, you can call me Xanthi, and today we are diving deep into the soundscapes contained within minutes 31 through 35 of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. This is a very special episode, but first let me describe what is going on in this set of minutes. So this excerpt of the film starts with Ben Kenobi saying, "Hello there," and ends with Obi-Wan Kenobi telling Luke about the Force. In between that, Obi-Wan catches Luke up to speed in many ways. They talk about Luke's father, the Force, like I said, the Clone Wars even. He says that he is Ben Kenobi, and we get the first lightsaber in Star Wars. So this is quite a monumental part of the film. And not only because of the story, but because of all these key concepts that are coming to the fore all at once. In last week's episode with Frank Lehman, we did our huge deep dive into the Force theme. And even though the Force theme does show up twice in this set of minutes, we're going to not be focusing on the Force theme in this episode. So if you want to go back and really get a deep dive into Binary Sunset and the Force theme, please go back to the last episode, episode 6. Because today, Justin Leo Kennedy is here with me, a repeat guest who came on the show for Last Jedi season. Justin is an electronic musician, composer, and assistant professor of music technology, and a big lightsaber sound design nerd. So today's episode is going to be a deep dive, and I mean like a very deep dive. Like it's going to go through 5 levels, okay? We're doing a very big episode about lightsaber sound design. First of all, welcome, Justin.
Hi, I'm so excited. Okay, I'll let you get back to hosting.
And because we're going to be doing, because this episode is basically going to be all about lightsabers, I just want to get some of the musical statistics out of the way right at the forefront so I don't forget at the end. So if you are paying attention to the minutes and where we are in the film, this is minutes 31 through 35 of A New Hope, which correlates to 0:30:01, the time code, until 35 minutes. The musical themes that we hear are the Force theme. We hear that twice. We also lightly hear the Imperial's motif when Obi-Wan is telling Luke about his father. And we also hear what Frank Lehman calls the distress theme, which is, it's like... And so that's toward the beginning. That's it for the themes. And if you're following along on the soundtrack, we hear a bit of the Landspeeder search / Attack of the Sand People from the soundtrack. Okay, with that out of the way, one more thing. Tim, a listener, sent me a really great question via email about sort of this scene, about when Obi-Wan meets Luke, or when he says hello there, and we kind of hear this like really magical type of music. And that's also such a big possible topic for discussion that I'm going to table that question for a future episode or like a standalone episode or something, because Tim's question was basically like, what makes moments like that sound so magical? And I think there are just many ways to answer that. And Justin, not to put you on the spot, but like before we start talking about lightsabers, if you have like your own take on why that part sounds like magical to you, because obviously it's subjective, you want to share?
I don't really, I mean, almost always I would say the orchestration in all of these, especially these early films, the orchestration is pretty immaculate. I'm sure you've already said a lot of this on your podcasts, on your previous episodes rather, but obviously John Williams was really a big fan of, Ravel, Stravinsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Holst. A lot of these composers are taught an orchestration class for a reason, right? So because John Williams has a really great understanding of orchestration, I would say the sonorities that he chooses, the chords that he chooses, the tones that he chooses.
And the instruments.
Yeah, and the instruments, those are going to be heard very clearly and in a very colorful manner, because he knows what instrument should get what note in what register. And that's a really special skill, and that's orchestration in a nutshell.
I think that's a great answer. And in that particular part, we have and we hear a lot of twinkly type of instruments, and in a very high register. And so that is that's a tentative. That's like a first stab at a incipient answer to that question. And okay, now we're going to go into the lightsaber portion. I will describe what we're going to do today. And when I say that we're going to talk about lightsabers in 5 levels of depth, I don't actually mean, I shouldn't say depth, because I wouldn't actually characterize any of these levels as necessarily deeper than the next, or maybe more expertise of a certain type would be helpful for some of the levels, but we will explain everything along the way. And it is also, we talked about this a lot in advance, because we could get very into the weeds on this, but I wanted to make sure that we touch upon what makes lightsaber sounds so, I don't know, so I don't want to say iconic, but iconic, what makes them so special, and what makes them what it is about them. It's kind of hard to discuss sounds sometimes unless we have a common language. And so we're going to be introducing some of that language and finding common ground on some of the sounds. I'm going to play a lot of sound clips, and we're going to just make sure that we're all on the same page with what things are called. And once we're able to talk about things, then we'll be able to really get into the nitty gritty of what defines one person's lightsaber from another, and the differences between the different types of lightsaber sounds, so that we can be a little bit more specific. And I think it's just, this is just something that I personally, as a fan, would want to have as a resource. So now that now that we have this opportunity where we have this scene where we get the first lightsaber, and my friend Justin is here with me, we're going to get into it. So the 5 levels are going to be: first, level 1. Again, think of this as elevator levels, where it's there's just different stuff on the levels. It's not beginner, okay? Because level 1 is a very Star Wars nerdy level. So if you're in this mostly for information on sound synthesis, this might be a difficult level for you. But this is a very Star Wars nerdy sound. So level 1 is going to be just what are the different lightsaber sounds? And we're going to go into ignition, retraction, hum, just the different states that lightsabers go through. And this, of course, is not only sound related, but it's just related to action-wise, what can the lightsaber do? Because that is what drives what we hear. I mean, that's, the sound designers have to design according to something that is on screen. And then level 2 we'll be taking a historical perspective, a documentarian perspective, and be really going to the source, the source himself, Ben Burtt, the sound designer for Star Wars. And we're going to be talking about, we've all read his sound clips, or, his sort of, I took the projector and whatever. And there's kind of these tales of how Ben Burtt made these sounds. And after scouring a lot of places, I think we're gonna make sure that you, the audience, understands what is meant by the things that are said in interviews, because in some of them it's clearer than others what these what these alchemies mean. Correct me if I'm saying anything along the way that you're I didn't agree to do that.
Alchemy is a good word. Alchemy, Lisa Belladonna is this modular synthesizer performer and genius composer and improviser, and she refers to herself as a sound alchemist. And if you watch her perform, it's totally true, because she's got all of these huge synthesizers with all these knobs and faders and things like that. And then you just watch her sculpt the sound right in front of you. It's unbelievable. The sound goes from this really creepy, scary soundscape to this really pretty, beautiful, pastoral one. It's happening right in front of you. So it's pretty remarkable.
That's
So
awesome.
sound alchemist is how she refers to herself. And so I would say alchemy. Alchemy is also the name of a synthesizer that you
That's
get
true.
when you buy Logic Pro. So if anyone out there ever hears of Logic Pro X, which is a digital audio workstation, they have a stock synthesizer that comes with it, and it's called Alchemy. So
This is
that was a
true.
long tangent that
All
totally
right.
derailed your
I'm
depths.
gonna keep just talking about just what the agenda is. And
Sorry.
listeners, if you don't know what Justin was just talking about, I think by the end of this episode, you will know what a synthesizer is and you will know what a digital audio workstation is. And honestly, I'm just very excited for this episode because if you're a lightsaber nerd, you're going to learn a lot about sound. And if you're a sound nerd, you're going to learn a lot about lightsabers through this. So this is kind of like the common tunnel where we're all going to meet. Okay, so anyway, um, so yeah, we're going to go into the historical perspective, and we're going to talk about like what were his inspirations, like what did people think of the sounds, like what were the attempts that were made, and also was Ben Burtt the first sound designer? So that'll be the sort of documentarian perspective, and then level 3 was going to be the mega sound nerd zone. Okay, we're going to be talking about trying to understand like what on a physical level is happening that makes the lightsabers sound the way they do. Because just hearing, that the hum is a projector plus a TV thingy, that's a story and that's interesting, but it is also interesting to sort of hear like why that works and like what effects are taking place. For example, like Doppler effect is really crucial to the swinging lightsaber sound. Um, and so we're going to be talking about like this will be like the big deep dive into understanding like the principles of sound. Um, yeah, and I think we're going to be talking about like synthesis and maybe even like attack and sustain and decay and um, Doppler, of course, and frequency and amplitude. And because we're talking about sound, because we're talking about lightsabers, I think this is something like you'll have we'll try our best to make it like relatable and make it so that you can learn about sound since you already understand lightsabers. Okay, so then level 4 will be sort of like I think this will be a shorter section. It will be kind of like how you can experiment with making lightsaber sounds at home, or at least like parts of them, either from like a very technical computer based side, or even just like taking some of the real life really things that you could just do yourself at home. One of them is like something that I did growing up that I didn't even realize actually goes into the lightsaber sound. So that will be fun. I think that one will also be kid friendly too. Um, and then finally, we're gonna end with like big picture stuff, discussion on the future of lightsaber sounds, which is a very interesting topic. Since lightsaber sounds are changing, that is a thing, or they have been re-recorded, and we'll talk about maybe why, and also addressing some of the frequently asked questions and comments that I see floating around on the internet. And yeah, not that they asked us specifically, but we're going to get into the drama. I'm just kidding. It's not dramatic, but it kind of is for some people because, Star Wars fans are passionate about things. And we're also going to we'll get there. We'll get there. We'll talk about like old school sound design and sort of new school and like where people like Ben Burtt maybe fit into today. And that will be about it. And of course, at the very, very end, we'll do the Star Wars Music Minute questionnaire. So Justin will answer those questions at the very end. But without further ado, let's get into lightsabers.
Yay! Can I
uh,
can I can I tell a quick story about lightsabers?
yes.
So, for anyone listening, if you listened to the last episode I was on, first of all, thank you. That was very nice of you. But secondly, if you listened to the last episode I was on, you may recall that my 3 favorite Star Wars characters are Jar Jar Binks, sorry, not sorry, Qui-Gon, and R2D2. And that's totally true, but I was really into Star Wars before episode 1 came out. And so before episode 1 came out, my favorite character besides R2 was Luke Skywalker. And I liked Luke Skywalker so much, I dressed up as Luke Skywalker in 5th grade for Halloween.
I
I
was
dressed up.
Leia in 5th grade.
Oh wow. We would have been like
Twins.
the winners of the
Oh,
costume
damn it.
contest. So I was Luke Skywalker in 5th grade, and I was Luke Skywalker like the Return of the Jedi version when he's wearing the black, and he's coming to like show Jabba the Hutt like I'm a badass now. I'm pretty good at the Force thing now. So I really liked that Luke Skywalker. And the reason I bring all this up, because you might say, what's that got to do with lightsabers? Everything has everything to do with it, because I had a toy lightsaber. It was a really nice toy lightsaber. I was very lucky to have it. And it had the handle that kind of looked like the Return of the Jedi handle, and it was green. But most importantly, when I would push a button on it, it would do the ignition sound, and then it would also do some other cool like humming sounds, and like when I would push a button, it would do the waving it around and motion sounds. And I remember when I had that in my hands, I really felt like I was Luke Skywalker. And it's interesting because there were a lot of other like lightsaber toys out there, right? Just have you ever seen the multicolored ones at like Disneyland or something like that, where it's like it's a light up sword, right? Um, well, in any event, there's lots of like toy swords out there, and there's lots of toy lightsabers, but this one made me feel very much like I was the character. And I really think, looking back on it now, that it was the sound. It was like the sound of the lightsabers. It really made me feel like, yep, I'm definitely Luke Skywalker as I hold this thing.
You
So I'm
definitely
very
are.
excited to talk about all of this. And I'm wearing black. If you're listening, you can't hear it, but I'm wearing black. With a splash of color. I have a white scarf, but I'm wearing black in honor of this
Return of the
monumentous occasion
Jedi.
in my life. Yes.
Well, this is great. That's a great segue, because part one right now is I'm going to play different lightsaber sounds, and we're going to name like what these types of lightsaber sounds are called. And so, just to clarify, I'm not like saying I'm not talking about specific characters at this point. I'm just talking about the different like states of lightsabers. So I sourced these sounds, and I will put the link in the show notes, from a YouTube channel called Mahler Cosplay. So yeah, because they have like, they put together like supercuts of a bunch of different ignitions and stuff like that. And I think they may have even made them or something, or like, replicated them. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure, but all right. So clip one is, where is it? Okay. So that was, why don't I do this at quiz style for you, Justin? What sounds were those?
Ignition.
Yep. That was a bunch of ignitions. And if you want to hear just like one ignition, that's just
Oh
a
man,
single one. You know that one.
that's the angry one though. That's the scary one, like when things are not going good.
The reason I liked the supercut version is so we could hear like a variety and how they're different, but still the same, in principle. So again, this is another one. Yeah. Yeah, I like how they're like different lengths. But anyway, those are ignitions, also called power up. What other names could that go by?
Lightsaber turn on.
Yeah, turn on. So that's what that sound. And now the next one will be, yeah. So which one is that?
Lightsaber turn off.
Yeah. So that's the retraction.
You know what's? Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. And right now we're just gonna go through them, but there's gonna be some fun facts about all of these.
My apologies. Continue.
Oh, were you gonna give a fun fact?
I was just gonna say, in the music minutes, in the scene that we're looking at today, you don't actually see the lightsaber retract.
Yeah.
It's off camera, so the only way you know that it's retracted is you hear the sound. So it's really I say lightsaber turn off like a silly, happy, excited kid. But actually, the sounds are very important for us to understand what's happening off screen sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. That's another thing. Like sometimes we don't see lightsabers, but we hear them, and that's how we know that, like, yeah. Anyway, so yes, retract, also called power down. And now we have, where is this? This is another, so this is the second one. These are, and now another version of the same sound. So they're all slightly different, but they are.
Oh, that's my favorite. That's the hum.
Yeah, that's the hum. And I would say it's also called idle, right? And sort of a variation of that, I think. And that would be,
In motion.
yes. And this is also called a swing or a stroke. And listeners, you might have a different name for it, but yep, it's basically idle, but moving. So humming, but moving. I don't know. I hope that made sense. Okay, and here's another
Totally
one.
made sense. Well, that's when they're clashing.
Yep, that's clashing. So to be clear, that's when two lightsabers are clashing, because lightsabers can obviously cut into pretty much anything except a dark saber. But yes, that is the sound of lightsabers clashing. And this is, and that is,
Gosh, is that when they're held together?
yep, it's when they're like locking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and let's see. I think, did I miss any like big ones? I think those are like the main types of sounds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't think of any others because that the lightsabers being held together, that's a really similar sound to, like when Qui-Gon puts the lightsaber through the door
Mm-hmm.
in episode 1, right? That's a really similar sound.
Mm-hmm. I guess it just depends on what is being cut, but um, yeah, that's. I like the cutting holes into stuff sound.
It's a very it's a very Jedi tradition to take your lightsaber and, oh, I'm in a gym. We'll just cut the door open or cut the floor open
I
or
know people give Han Solo like flack for just like blasting everything, but like, what if you just like were cutting holes with your lightsaber into the door? That's like a new level of funny. Um, yeah. So other ways that we might describe lightsaber sounds are, well, a lot of people will use words to describe lightsaber sounds, and some words that I've heard in association with various sounds are maybe like a snap or a hiss or a snap hiss, or I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I always thought buzz and hum were two of the
Mm,
ones that when I was a kid I used to always do that. And I also had is it an onomatopoeia? Is that the right word for
mm-hmm.
like, so I used to always just go like vroom, vroom, like at home when I was pretending and playing around. So I think that those are the three main ones that I used to have in my head when I was a child.
Yeah. Okay. Listeners, if you have any, like, I have a question for you. Like, how would you spell a lightsaber sound? There have been many attempts have been made. I don't know if the definitive one has been discovered. No, but just kidding. Like, it is interesting sometimes to think about how these are spelled, and I think they're spelled sometimes in books. I just can't really remember. And um, one that I see a lot with ignition is like chew. It's like TSHEWW, like chew,
Yeah.
or like pshoo.
Yeah, that's the one I always start it with like I always have like a P and an SH in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's very consonant heavy. There's really very little like whenever we spell out, whenever we do like the onomatopoeia for the ignition sounds, we don't use very many vowels. It's mostly consonants, I
Oh,
think.
that's true. And it ends with like the shh.
Yeah, that's
Shh.
at least what I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, in saying them out loud too. And I think like clashing, like ksh, ksh, ksh. So like with a K, with I don't know, with clashing consonants, and then
Yeah,
swinging would be like vroom, or like vroom, vroom. Yeah.
that's perfect though. So yeah, and there's a lot more tonality in those sounds, I think, right?
Yeah. And
So
uh,
we hear a lot more like vowels and like pitch moving up and down.
that is true. That it's definitely more pitched. Like it's I, I think the original lightsaber sound is between like an F sharp. It goes like from an F sharp to a D ish. But yeah, so listeners, if you want to let us know how you would spell, or how you in your headcanon, or when you're like writing about lightsabers in your diary, how do you spell the lightsaber sound? Because we all do
Oh,
it, right?
I'd be so happy to see just a Twitter thread of people just putting in their like typed out lightsaber
What if it were
sounds.
like a lightsaber duel, but only with words? they would take it would take like a whole day. It'd be like shh,
It would be very GIF
and wait
heavy.
wait for someone to shh. um that's funny. So the last thing I'll say before we move on to the documentarian section is, well, okay, if we're actually gonna really get into this, different lightsabers in the films, especially in the original trilogy, have been associated with distinct ignition sounds. So lightsaber ignition sounds are sort of its own. I don't know. I think there's like a cult interest in ignition sounds specifically. I mean, I may have made that up, so I don't know. But
No, no, no. I mean, maybe you've made it up, but what you said totally resonates in my heart.
oh, okay,
I
good, good.
I when you had played an ignition sound, and I was like, that's Palpatine saying it's treason. I know that that's what that one
Mm.
is.
And I will say, a former guest of the show, Kyle Katarn, shout out to Kyle, mentioned Luke's green Return of the Jedi lightsaber ignition as his favorite.
It's a good one.
And I asked my brother last night too, and that's the one he said too. But I did tweet like a Twitter poll, like I don't know, it was like months ago, and I'll read the results. So the poll says, "You've just found a lightsaber. Lucky you. In a second, you'll get to use it for the first time. Which sound are you most excited to hear?" And there were 120 votes. 60.8% said ignition and retraction.
Oh man,
And
I was one of the only.
second
Go ahead.
place was 38.8. Like it's not even, it wasn't even really close. Second place was 30%, 30.8, and it was the fluctuating hum slash buzz. And at 2.5% was clashing, and 5.8 was cutting holes and stuff. So ignition and retraction was definitely number one, and the hum and buzz was definitely number two, and the other two, like I guess the clashing thing, I thought clashing would be rated a lot higher, but only 2.5%.
I feel that Buzz and Hum would have got a little bit more of the votes if people would have thought more about the Buzz slash Hum of Kylo Ren's lightsaber, because
I
that is
I
such a
agree.
good one.
I agree.
It just feels so dangerous, and like it just feels like the guy is on the very edge and you never know what's going to
Yeah.
happen.
I'm with you there. And maybe listeners, maybe you'll feel differently about how you have been conceiving about lightsabers at the end of this episode. So yeah, let's move on. Unless you have anything to add to this overview of like different lightsabers. I mean, I should mention we could also talk about how, you know, Jedi and Sith lightsabers tend to operate in different ways, canonically, like in their construction, and in ways that you can hear in their sound. Sometimes, most of the time, it just depends, you know, because the sound is never like perfectly aligned. Like I wouldn't really I don't think I would consider sound design necessarily always like canon, or it's hard because I think I would consider it canon, but I would not think like changes would debunk canon or in any way. That's just my take, because the special editions
No.
changed one of the lightsaber sounds, and I don't really think it means anything in the story there changed.
Yeah. I think you pretty thoroughly, you'd asked if I had anything to add. I think that's about as thoroughly as we could have covered that. Perhaps a listener out there is, shaking his, her, or their head thinking, nope, it could have gotten more in depth than that. But that's why there's Twitter. That's why there's comment sections.
That's true. Like the thorough person in me is also like, okay, I just want to say that we are aware of these, but we won't really be going into them too much.
Yeah.
But obviously there are cases where there's double lightsabers, and it's like, which one do you hear? And there will be cases. I don't know. Oh, and video games. I don't have the expertise to make specific references to video games, but I would say the general principles of lightsaber sounds would apply to video games. I just don't know like if there are extra variations of lightsaber sound in any of the video games that we're missing. But yeah, of course there are other variations out there. There's of course like Vernestra's light whip lightsaber that turns into a light whip, but I think that's only been that's definitely only been in books so far.
I'm dying to hear it though.
I know, right? Like, what does a lightsaber / light whip sound like? Yeah. And the different things that we can keep in mind are maybe like the time that it takes to, like, basically how powerful the lightsaber is. So that's the thing. It's like, even if we don't know what we're talking about with regard to the sound, or, and myself included, Justin is much more of an expert at like sound synthesis than I am. But even like the average Star Wars fan will know that like there's kyber crystals involved. There's like maybe there's some activation involved. There's different climates of different planets. There's maybe like different charge levels. There are physical factors that can play into a lightsaber, and so it'll be interesting to talk about how that does and doesn't influence the sound, some of these sounds. So yes. All right. Moving on. Level 2. Congrats. We made it to level 2. I should have put like a little twinkling sound. Maybe I'll put it in post.
Yeah,
level
do
2.
it in post.
Level 2.
Right. It goes right here.
Okay. Great. So now we're gonna get into some of the history. And Justin, I know that you know a lot about this too. So you can kick it off if you want to.
Yeah, so I mean, should we start with maybe the really well-known story of Ben Burtt and how he came up with the sound?
Yeah.
Or is that something you think all your listeners already know?
No, I think we need to. I think if we need to be thorough, we need to start from the beginning, because I also think these things, it's not like everyone remembers the exact way, and it's not everyone knows. I don't want to assume this knowledge on it for everyone.
Well, there's this fantastic video on YouTube. There's tons of great Star Wars sound design videos on YouTube, but one of them shows Ben Burtt talking about how he came up with the lightsaber sound. And he had said that he was really just concentrated on that sound. Like it was the one in his head that he felt like he had heard it somewhere, he said before.
Yes. As soon as he saw the concept art.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for, I would have forgotten that. Yeah. So as soon as he saw the concept art, he felt like he had heard it somewhere in his head or whatever. So he was a projectionist, like a movie projector or something, right? And he was listening. He heard the sound of an idling projector, and he recorded that sound.
All right, let's talk about what that is. Literally, Justin, I'm so like embarrassed, but a lot of the stuff about Ben Burtt's story never really stuck with me, because I didn't really know what the stuff they were talking about was, because it's mostly obsolete technology. So
Sure.
I didn't really understand a lot of that, and I couldn't understand from what idling projection thingy thing meant.
Oh, no
So can you
problem, no
explain
problem.
that for
You were
everyone?
talking to a man who is not embarrassed of his own learning disabilities. So I totally understand. I always ask for things to be re-explained. Have since I was a child. Um, an idling projector. So like if you go back in the day, like let's say you went to the movies, right? They have a reel to reel, projector,
Hmm.
and it like
And they're
can play the
massive.
yeah, they're pretty big, and they can play the footage, right? So the projector was making just this idling sound, and he was recording that. It made this really nice humming sound, and the sound of this like idling piece of machinery, it was kind of moving. It was moving a bit up and a bit down in terms of pitch level, and it was just creating this really nice humming sound, is what Ben Burtt said.
I'm going to play a
So
clip and tell me if this is something like it. No, I don't think that's the exact one at all,
I
but
call
I just
no,
like
no,
pulled
no.
a clip of a 35 millimeter film projection. So tell me what is different about Ben
Well,
Burtt's.
one thing that I really learned from Ben Burtt, and this will segue well into the next sound. So if you take there's a couple of different types of microphones out there. There's actually several different types, but two of the main categorizations of microphones are dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. And you probably already know this, but maybe not everyone listening
I don't.
does.
Oh, right.
So a dynamic microphone is mostly going to kind of take what is in front of it. It won't get maybe necessarily like all of the room sound, right? It might
And
not get as much of the room sound.
I am using a dynamic microphone for reference. And I hope on the podcast people normally can hear my voice pretty clearly. But if you were actually sitting in the room with me, you would also hear an extremely loud computer fan. And the reason I use a dynamic mic is so that you don't hear my computer fan, basically, because if I record with a condenser mic, you will be able to hear everything. You will be able to hear that loud noise. So
Yeah, and I am also using a dynamic mic, so I'm going to just move over this way to the side of the dynamic mic, and you'll notice as I'm moving that the sound is getting less and less clear because I'm no longer in front of the dynamic microphone. And now
yes,
that I'm all the way down here, I have to shout in order to get the sound into it. And as I come back over here, then you can hear me a bit more clearly because now I'm back in front of the mic. You see, when you watch a band perform, the reason that the singer uses a dynamic microphone is because those
they want to
daggone
scream.
drums are really loud,
Oh, yeah, that too.
right? Those drums will just bleed right into the mic. And yeah, there's tons of reasons. So that's a dynamic microphone versus a condenser mic, which is what you might use when you want to pick up more of the ambiance of the room, perhaps. And so getting back to the whole Ben Burtt and projection and how he came up with the sound. So we were saying he heard an idling projector, and all the projectors sound different, right? Well, so if you have
Does
yourself a
idling mean
dynamic
it's just kind
microphone,
of not moving or like there's not actually a film in it? It's just sort of
I would assume that it just means it's yeah,
okay.
sitting idle and just kind of like vibrating, like making its like little machinery sound. I'd have to
Oh,
double check.
machinery sounds right because what I've written down is like simplex projectors, which I think is a type of projector, and it's the interlock motors in idle.
Yeah, so when you hear a projector move, you're gonna get a lot of like kind of noisy sounds. Um, and so I would imagine that maybe you would want it to just kind of sit there idling so you could just get the buzzing sound.
Oh, that's true. That's why when I looked at projector sounds, it mostly sounded like like it sounded like something's on a track, like when you're spinning like when you're spinning a wheel to get a prize or whatever, and it's like, and
Yeah.
that's not
I
in the lightsaber sound. So
I couldn't tell you for sure, having not actually been there when he recorded it, and having never been a projectionist myself, nor have I ever worked with actual film, like movie film before. But I guess my point is, getting back to this microphone thing, is you can really emphasize a sound that you're recording by moving the microphone around, right? So if you wanted to get more of like the hum, well, you just put the microphone closer to it, right? I had a student who did an awesome sound design project for one of my classes, and it was a video game audio class, and he needed to record the sound of what would be a big machine that's sitting in this video game, right? It's like a machine that the character walks in front of and looks at. And so what he did is this student went to the back of his refrigerator and recorded like where the motor is, with the refrigerator with a dynamic microphone. And that segues into the buzzing sound. The buzzing sound of the lightsaber is the other half, as Ben Burtt describes it. He says it's kind of a 50-50. It's kind of a hum and kind of a buzz. And the buzzing sound he got by moving a microphone behind a picture tube of an old television set. So
What's a
just
picture
imagine.
tube?
Yeah, so I don't know exactly how it works,
Because
but
okay,
if
the other description I've seen, it's a cathode ray tube television set.
perfect.
What
I
does that mean?
Oh, well, you got me. I don't know that much about like old-timey electronics. I should. Um, but the thing that I really got out of that story he told is it was incidental, right? So he was just carrying the microphone across the room, and he was carrying, I would assume, a dynamic microphone. And as it passed by the back of the television, this is an older television, he heard this buzzing sound. And so the humming sound of this idling projector and the buzzing sound of this old television set, that's how he came up with sort of this 50-50 like idle lightsaber sound. And then, of course, there's the story of how he got the Doppler effect.
Oh yeah, let's
So,
not get there yet.
yeah. I was gonna push pause on that one, but yeah. So that's essentially how he got that sound.
Okay, this just in. Cathode ray tube is a vacuum tube containing one or more electron guns, the beams of which are manipulated to display images on a phosphorescent screen. Okay, I'm reminded of Willy Wonka. Okay, I think that's what that is.
This is
So that makes sense because the buzzing, it was like the interference, right? Basically the interference from walking around with a microphone in his hand. Um, you know, which is like a mistake, basically. And that's how he describes it. He does say that it was like it was a mistake, like it was an accidental thing that he discovered. And I think he even said like the microphone itself was maybe like broken or something. So anyway, like Justin was saying, it is important to note that what we think of as the hum or the idle, I like to internally also call it the hum buzz, because it is comprised, or it is made up of, the hum from the projector and the buzz from the TV interference. And the hum buzz is what makes the basis of the lightsaber sound, at least the idle. Now,
this is.
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and then moving on, when we talk about the related sound, which is the swing of that hum, then are we ready to get there?
Yeah, for sure. So the swing of the lightsaber, Ben Burtt got this by getting a shotgun microphone. It's kind of like, imagine a microphone that if you were going to record audio like on the set of a movie, you have it like at the end of a big stick, right? And you
Like a boom,
yeah. So he has a shotgun microphone,
which
and
honestly looks like a lightsaber. Shotgun microphones look very long, like you wouldn't think it looked like a microphone. You would think it looked like a stick. It's so holding a stick, basically.
yeah, and it's really perfect for this task.
They're
So
sensitive.
yeah, so he has this shotgun microphone, and he's playing the sound of the lightsaber idle, or excuse me, he's playing the sound of the idling lightsaber on a speaker, and then he swings a microphone in front of that speaker, and by doing that, it creates variation in the pitch of that humming sound, and that is achieved through the Doppler effect. And the Doppler effect we can dive into, but I don't want to
I
jump
think
ahead too far.
I think it's okay to talk about the Doppler effect here, because that sensation of basically just moving something in front of something and hearing the sound change because of it, or even just like how I learned about it in ninth grade, which was like when an ambulance or, a siren goes past you and you hear how the sound like decays, or like how, the siren, it sounds like the pitch is changing as the siren gets farther and farther away from you. And I think that's it. I think that's like such a visceral effect.
Yeah.
It's just, the Doppler effect. Let me give like a lay person explanation and tell me if I'm right. It's sort of like it describes the way that sound changes when you move, like from the source, basically, or when the
Yeah.
source is moving, how the sound pitch, or like how the sound, how the pitch changes. Basically, it's like pitch shifting.
I have a definition ready from
Great.
Charles Dodge and Thomas A. Jarris's book, um, Computer Music, and it says the Doppler effect describes the change in pitch that results when the source and the listener are moving relative to each other. When a
Perfect.
sound source and a listener are moving closer together, the wave fronts of that sound will reach the listener more frequently, causing the perceived pitch to be raised from its stationary value. So, in other words, when you're standing outside, just like Chrysanthi said, and the ambulance is off in the distance and it's getting closer to you, well, two things happen. It gets louder and the pitch goes up. And then once it's right in front of you and it's going away from you, two things happen. It gets quieter and the pitch goes down. And that's a very simple, maybe oversimplification, but that's a pretty straightforward, digestible way to think about what a Doppler effect is.
And if you just think about how lightsabers work and how we see them in films, which has this sound design applied to it, that's basically exactly what it is. Like it's such a beautifully realistic, like physical. I almost think of it like practical effects sound design of the lightsaber. And if you watch videos of Ben Burtt doing this, which you can find many clips online that show him waving the shotgun mic in front of the speaker, it looks like it really looks like he's waving a lightsaber. And I think like he did actually, didn't he like mimic some of the lightsaber movements from the film in order to, get the sound, get the swings like synced up to the film. So very cool. And that's Doppler effect. And that's also a little bit more about how he made the idle sound. Now there's of course other lightsaber sounds too. The way that the clash was made was another combination. So the idle was the combination of the hum and the buzz, and the clashing was the combination of dry ice plus metal. And this is the one that I've done as a kid. Is I used to love dry ice, dry ice experiments. And if you just like put a metal spoon on the dry ice, you hear something like this. Or something like this.
Please tell me you did that in your home.
I didn't. Oh my gosh, no, I didn't. No, I got these from freesound.org and YouTube, and all the links to all of these sources will be in the description. So yes, if you've ever played around with dry ice, like in school or something, you don't want to touch it. Okay, so you don't touch dry ice. Proceed with caution. But if you touch metal to it, it does that squealing sound. So that's one part of it, and the other part of it is something called a carbon arc lamp, and this is also something that he discovered while working out at movie theater, I think, or just something related to like movies or, his work doing that. And when you are lighting the lamp, it like a buzz, like a spark sort of is created, like from I don't know, you can jump in if I'm kind of floundering on the explanation a little bit, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you're doing fine. You're doing fine.
Okay.
I'm following.
Okay, good. There is a spark that happens when the lamp is sort of the spark jumps from one, is it called a cathode? I'm not sure. From like one part of the lamp to another. That's what happens. Okay. I'm scrolling on my notes because I'm like, there's so many notes. Where in my notes did I write this? I definitely wrote it somewhere. But anyway, it's a carbon arc lamp plus the dry ice with metal. And that is essentially that sound.
I
All
would
right.
say too that this is getting into classic Ben Burtt sound design technique. So
Mm.
we've talked about these two sounds so far, and right, the idling, the humming, and then the sounds that you're just describing here. And what is a classic Ben Burtt technique is getting all of these different recordings or getting all of these different sounds and layering them in a very creative way and mixing them. And what I mean by that is certain sounds maybe are louder than others or quieter than others, but mixing them, like blending them so that they create sort of one sound effect. They create one kind of a thing that gets shown in the movie. So lightsabers, it's just one object, or a lightsaber is just one object, but it has all of these complex layers of sound to make it feel almost like more alive, I would say.
And if you think about the way that like Chewbacca and like the TIE fighters and just like so many other animals are often used, yes, this is definitely that's it. That's a great thing to point out in this documentary slash history section of this episode. Um, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more specific with sources. If anyone listening really wants to know exactly like what was used in some of these sounds, okay. So the source of this is the Dolby Institute podcast. Um, the steady state hum Sony Trinitorn tube television. That's what caused the interference on Ben Burtt's shieldless microphone while he was walking across the room. With it idling, plus the idling motors of the 35 millimeter dubber kind of projector, which we said was the simplex. Okay, so yeah, that was that. Going back to the very Ben Burtt technique of or approach to sound design, another thing that Ben Burtt used a lot, though he didn't invent it, and we actually talked about this a few episodes ago, briefly, but is the worldizing, which is I guess it's the technique of taking sound, bringing sounds into the world, out into the real world, so to speak, so that, and then like re-recording it with the ambiance of whatever room he was in, or like a location, basically not keeping it all like under the hood, which I think of like making things purely on the computer. And you could make a sound totally on the computer and just immediately put that in the film without ever having like played it and whatever. But Ben Burtt really was into like mixing a bunch of things, and it very almost in like a practical effects kind of way, like with the lightsaber, literally recording something coming out of speakers. And the worldizing is a part of that too. And the person who actually invented, or I don't know, started doing worldizing was Walter Murch, and he did that on American Graffiti. And so yeah, Ben Burtt would do that a lot. He would play the sound that he created out on speakers and then like re-record it. Did I explain that? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and it's yeah. The guy was unbelievable, or the guy is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yes, totally explained correctly. I'm just standing here thinking about
How cool he
what
is.
what kind of human mind can find all of these things. But yes.
Ooh, this will be interesting. This will be good fodder for our final section of today of the discussion, because there are lots of like philosophical and process oriented questions we can think about, especially as we move into the future of sound design. And by future, I mean we're already in it. So, all right. So I think that. Oh, is there anything else that I wanted to say? Oh, okay. We're in the documentary section. Okay. Oh yeah. Apparently, his first assignment was to do the R2 sound, but he just was more inspired immediately by the lightsaber. And as we talked about a few episodes ago, the R2 was very difficult for him, but the lightsaber, as Justin mentioned, was sort of the one that immediately he kind of felt like he just knew how that should work. And George Lucas apparently, like, the first time he heard it, didn't really say anything, and Ben Burtt was like, "Okay, I guess that means he liked it. I guess that means it is fine."
It's just unbelievable that the film where he, came up with this technique of, I'm going to wave a shotgun microphone in front of a speaker to achieve lightsaber being moved through the air kind of sound. It's unbelievable that that's the same film where he's like, I'm going to kind of make these sort of baby sounds and combine them with an ARP 2600 synthesizer for
Right, R2.
R2D2's voice. Man, it's and then and he's worldizing, and he's just conquering everything in sound design all in one go.
Totally. And some would say, I think Ben Burtt would say, I think it might actually be true that he is he may have been the first credited sound designer on a film. Prior to Star Wars, the way that sound in films worked was there would be like a sound editor and then sort of a sound. I don't think recorder is the correct term, but basically like there'd be someone to capture sounds, and then there'd be someone to do all the adding of effects afterward. But what Ben Burtt did was something that wasn't exactly either of those. It was really creating, like, world building the sounds, basically, because also like they were also working with a lot of 20th Century Fox effects, stock effects and things, and films often mostly used like stock effects. And in the original Star Wars, there are actually a lot of stock effects, and actually a lot of the changes that were made in the special editions, even though fans may not have liked all the changes just because, they may have been used to the way it was before. A lot of that was like to replace things that were just stock effects.
Yeah, I whenever I think about these, like that part of the sound design history, like whether or not Ben Burtt is the first credited, I always think to myself about just if you watch the movie WALL-E, I may have mentioned this on your last podcast, but if you watch the movie WALL-E, it just has this unbelievable documentary where he talks about like these old Disney movies, and Jimmy McDonald. I believe it's Jimmy McDonald. Oh gosh, now I'm being recorded. I better have gotten that right. But in any event, the world of sound effects for movies definitely changed after Ben Burtt. And this idea of it's not quite Foley, it's not quite recording the exact thing that's on screen, it's not quite mixing. I mean, it is a little.
It's like all of those, but none of those.
It's somehow, yeah, that's a perfect description. It's kind of like all of them, but it's also not any of them.
Yeah, it's like it's a creative role that can draw upon the skills used in all of those other roles, but it's not defined by any of the other roles or any of the other, specific skills. Yeah, it's like a very creative way of doing it. And I think it's so interesting that like there is a pre and post Star Wars in like every department, it seems.
Yeah,
Sound, music, sound, special effects, like just
right.
There's just pre and post Star Wars.
Well, and the thing that always kind of blows me away is every time they do one of these trilogies, it's always like each trilogy really adds something unique across all of those disciplines, right? Like sonically, visually, it's really cool. It's one of the best parts, most rewarding parts about being a fan. And it's been really cool to see the evolution of lightsabers sounds, which I know we'll get to a bit later on.
Yeah. I think this is a good time to transition to sparkly sound. Level 3. This is going to be the mega sound nerd section where we're going to talk about what is happening in these sounds. We are going to get more into the weeds of what makes a lightsaber sound the way it does. And before we really get into it, um, I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of why we are doing the demonstrations that we are about to do, because I don't want you, especially if you listeners are not really familiar with creating sounds or not like super like if this is new territory, I don't want you to be intimidated by that. And so I guess the bigger point, the bigger picture is like, how does this help us learn more about lightsabers? Like, what does this teach us about the way that sound works in Star Wars or otherwise? And also the point of like what Justin is going to show, which is like how he has basically deconstructed the lightsaber sound, is not just to like show off how great he is, because he's really great, but it's so that we can hear what the different components sound like separately. And the way that Ben Burtt put these sounds together is sort of, we were talking about alchemy before. It's sort of in a way that is like extremely hard for the modern day person to recreate, to be like, I don't know, accidentally recording the television and then get the projector sound and then do that. And plus, doing that also doesn't really tell us about how like the sound waves are working and how, like what is happening, because that kind of is like basically it's like a calculator version of getting an answer. And like what happens if you didn't have a projector, for example? What happens if you didn't have this sort of television? Well, what do we know about the sound? Like, how would we know what to even replace it with? Or how would we even know what else it might sound like? And I think those are the interesting questions that we can get at in trying to recreate things and trying to talk about things in a more technical way. And also, like we said at the beginning, it is also just partially so we can talk about things more and talk about the different attacks, the different lightsabers, and the different like frequencies being, the different fundamental frequencies, I guess, of the different lightsabers and things like that. So Justin, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling very excited.
Okay, cool. I think one to whet our appetite, I guess, I'm going to play some of the hums again. Let's talk about what is happening in the hum sound.
Yeah, so one of the most important things I think in understanding why we would dissect a sound is sometimes when we give an explanation about anything, whether we're a musician, a sound designer, uh, a biologist, an astrophysicist, sometimes when you give an explanation of something, it can sound more intimidating and more complicated than it really is, right? This is a kind of a complex sound, but when we say it's got these, when we describe the projector kind of sound element and the buzzing sound element, it can be sort of not it's not tangible. It's not something that we can really picture. We can't really picture those sounds very easily in our heads. And so when we say something like, oh well, you just combine a projection sound with the back of a television sound, it's like, well, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, how
Yeah,
do
and
those
then
even?
beyond that, it's like that's just a cool story. That doesn't really.
Yeah. And so today, what I'm hoping to do is try to make some of those things tangible. So what I did in preparation for today's podcast is I went to a YouTube channel named Dr. Mix, and Dr. Mix has a very informative how to recreate a lightsaber sound video. And that video even has audio recordings that he made that you can download, and you can download like different components of the lightsaber, and it's really cool. And the reason that I downloaded those files, because I really wanted to make the lightsaber sound as much on my own as I could. I made the hum, the idling sound, but the reason I downloaded this pack is because sometimes in the sound design world, you just don't have access to a certain thing that you might want to record. I could not anywhere here in Cullowhee, North Carolina, which is, I could not anywhere here in this city locate an old television that had a picture tube that had the right like sound quality. And Dr. Mix put that up. I downloaded that. And then instead of doing the idling projector, he used a synthesizer, and that's right in my wheelhouse. And so that part I did do kind of, I looked at what he did and I kind of just did it on my own.
Okay, I'm going to cut in here. Okay. Justin is being very, how do I put this? Justin, first of all, I think what you have done is a lot more interesting than making it from scratch with the components. And I hope that like that is a takeaway for people, because so what if he recreated it? Like that's cool. Like, I don't know. That wouldn't be, to me, that wouldn't be that cool to watch someone else just show that they copied exactly the way that Ben Burtt did it. I think what's cool about the fact that YouTubers like Dr. Mix and you're going to show us is that you've pulled apart these sounds, and so that we can isolate them and hear like what, regardless of how you got it, or if you got it from a pack or whatever, or if you recorded it yourself or not. Like, I think it'll be really cool if you let us hear what it would sound like if it was just the quote unquote projector sound, and then let us hear what it would sound like if it were just the buzz, and then what it sounds like together, so that we can like fully appreciate, that the hum buzz is like really the mix of two different sounds. Starting with Ben Burtt's projector sound, and then, of course he added the buzz because he needed it to sound more dangerous. So yeah.
Do we want to start with kind of the idling projector type of sound?
Yeah, let's start with that.
Okay, so just the idling sort of projector sound, which was not achieved by recording an idling projector. We don't have one on the Western Carolina University campus that sounded the way that I wanted it to. So as I said, I followed this Dr. Mix tutorial, and we're using a synthesizer here. And the synthesizer has 3 different waveforms it can create. So you can choose what kind of waveforms you want. So basically, there are 3 waves for this one sound. And so what I'm going to do is I will play the 3 of them together and then isolate each one of them one at a time. And so this is just the humming sound, just what would be the projector sound. So there's no buzz in that sound.
It's interesting because as you play that as on its own, it does sound very lightsabery. So I'm curious what the buzz will add.
Yeah. So if we add the buzz in, well, before we get to the buzz, let's listen to just one oscillator at a time, which is like, let's listen to one waveform at a time. It's really interesting to do that. So this is basically what I'm saying is there are layers. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I want to make sure that we're showing all the steps to get to this point, because I think if people don't know, I just don't want to lose people. Okay. So first and foremost, Justin keeps distinguishing between like his projector was made with a synthesizer, which doesn't mean that it's not still a projector. Like, I think we could replace the word projector in our heads with this synthesized projector, because at the end of the day, it is like a replica basically of what the projector sounds like. It was just made synthetically. It was just synthesized. Think of like something that was like maybe 3D printed instead of whatever is not 3D printed, but it's still we're still creating the same sound, just it's not found in the wild. That's like the only difference. It's still the sound. I mean, I don't want to say that's the only difference, but still that is what the sound is. And there are many different ways to make a sound. And sound design wise, or like in the creation of sounds, like we've been talking about Ben Burtt, who really recorded a lot of sounds, and you can go about methods of recording things that you find in the wild and mixing them, and that's almost like you know, a more it's a very hands-on and very like physical almost. And you can also and then you can also how am I putting this? You can use sounds that you record, and you can make you can use sounds that you can record sounds into what's called samples, and make sounds based on like the real things that you recorded. Or you can also make sounds via other methods, like using synthesizers, which generate sound from oscillators. Let me know if
Yeah.
I'm butchering anything, but like
No, you're doing fine. So
oscillators are just the sound source. It
yeah.
doesn't. Yeah, that's
So
just what it's called.
if you ever hear like a test tone that just goes boop, that's a sine wave probably,
Yep,
right?
and an
That,
oscillator generates the sine wave.
yeah, an oscillator generates the sine wave. It's this electronically generated sound. It comes from electronics. And so this synthesized projector, which I love that phraseology here, this synthesized projector has three parts to it. And so we will go through those three parts, and it will kind of help us understand how they come together. So here is one of them. Here's the second one. And you might say those basically sound identical. They're very
No.
similar. They're very, very, very similar. They're almost identical, but they're slightly different. Watch what happens when we blend them together. There's the second one, and here's the first one. So they're not in tune. Since they're not in tune exactly, you hear this kind of movement. They kind of move back and forth between one another since they're not perfectly in tune. And they're different. The waveforms are different shapes. It's okay if you don't understand what that means, but just think about it this way, is that since they're different shapes, it helps create this movement. So if we listen again, listen for the movement. So those are the first two components, and then the third component we'll listen to on its own right now, and it's lower. It's in the lower register. That's my favorite part. So when we blend all of those together,
That's so cool.
so it's actually a very pleasant sound. And that again, I got from watching the Dr. Mix tutorial and or video. And what I wanted to say is that he offers these sample pack downloads. In other words, he recorded those three layers together, and you can download them. But I actually didn't want that because I wanted control over each individual layer. So I paused the video and squinted really hard at his synthesizer.
So that you could
And
isolate the waves, the three waves.
I just kind of reverse engineered. Okay, I can see that setting. I can see that setting. Okay, I think I can figure this out. And I just kind of sat in my office for about an hour and a half until I felt like I got the right sound.
Well, thanks
and
for doing that for us. It was, I think it was really I think it was very cool to hear, like to keep breaking the sound down into smaller parts. So we haven't even gotten to the buzz yet. That's just
I know we haven't even got to the buzz.
That's cool.
Okay. So back to our good friend Dr. Mix. Good friend. I don't know the guy. But he's it was a good video. But he recorded the back of an old television, and it was a pretty nice buzz that he got. It had this really super high pitch frequency, and if you kind of are listening in your car or you don't know what that means, just imagine something high pitched that's kind of obnoxious, and that's all you really need to know. And the point I'm making is some of this old equipment, when you record it, it's got some flaws in it, and so when you are the sound designer, you might kind of go in and clean up some of those sounds. And so when he did his video, he cleaned up that sound so that it would sound crisp and nice and got rid of the pesky high pitch. And so what I wanted was the same opportunity. I wanted the raw recording he took, the one that was flawed and had all the stuff in it that's like not ideal, because I really enjoy the process of learning how to clean things up. So I got that recording. Long story short, I got the recording that he did of the television set. I got rid of the high pitched like sound in the way upper register, and then I pitch shifted it down. So like if it was a note here, I pitch shifted it down here. So I moved the pitch down, and then yeah, it's a simple buzzing sound.
Can we hear it?
Of course. And sorry if I rambled a bit there, but here we go. I'll load this up. So one thing that's really interesting is that for part of my day, I was working in my office and it was during business hours. So I was wearing headphones, right? Because I work at a university and, there's people having meetings upstairs and I can't just be lightsabering away, while someone's in a meeting up there necessarily. And the reason that I bring that up is because that buzzing sound, it really wore my ears out fast. And that's an interesting thing for people who are listening to know, is that certain sounds tire your ears out. It's called ear fatigue. And there's lots of really interesting reasons for that. Maybe I won't get too into it. I'll try to stay focused on the point. But what I just wanted to say is, if I were to just let that play for like 2 minutes, once you took your headphones off or once you turn the engine of your car off, you might notice kind of a tingling in your ears, and hearing stuff might sound a little different. So it's very interesting to me that the lightsaber sound, it needed that kind of buzzing, that sort of somewhat dangerous sound, and it kind of fatigues your ears. So it's kind of like there's almost, I would say, this kind of psychoacoustic physiological quality going on with the lightsabers, which is really neat.
Like it's not so pleasant that you just have it like as ambiance for your dinner. You wouldn't just keep it on. Like even though it is pretty calm when it's just idling, it is still, you do want to turn it off when you're done.
Yeah, totally want to turn it off when you're done. I'm just thinking about like a romantic candlelit dinner with like lightsabers in the center of the table. Next time my wife and I are gonna have like a really romantic night,
I'm gonna make shirts that have this image. I'm gonna draw this. Okay.
I'll just say, all right, sweetie, I got a really great surprise for you. And she'll just come in and be like, okay, well.
That's really funny.
So I guess the cool thing about this now is now we understand we have the synthesized projector and we have the buzzing sound. And so what we can do now is we can combine those two sounds and we can hear that the lightsaber just idling. So let's hear what that would sound like with everything combined.
Yeah, can you play it without the buzz now? Just one more time.
And farewell to the buzz. I'll turn it down.
So this one should be a little bit smoother. Okay, now add the buzz back in.
This is just the buzz. It's funny when you hear just the buzz on its own. It's weird how the two of them together feel like magic.
Totally, and it's.
But when it's one of them, you're like, oh, okay.
It's making me think about the ratio of hum to buzz, and I know that like the original lightsaber sounds pretty much even. But if we think about like Kylo Ren's lightsaber, or like some of the ones I feel like have the buzz turned up or something. Like there are other elements I feel. I mean,
Oh man,
Kylo's also have like, well, well, the sequel trilogy lightsabers are kind of a different subject that we'll get to.
they're
But
yeah, they're really the sequel trilogies. I like what they added.
me too.
I really thought it was cool. So I'm not like a purist. But what you're saying is a great point in that, yeah, if you have a villain or if you have someone who's maybe a bit edgier, like maybe even pre Darth Vader Anakin, you might consider adding some more buzz. I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what all the sound design discussions were, but the ratio of those things, yeah, that's mixing, right? Like, and so for those listeners who aren't familiar with mixing, yeah, we can have more buzz. So then we would say, oh, that's loud. The buzz is louder in the mix. Or we could have more hum, and we would say, oh, the hum is louder in the mix. And that's
Yeah.
the art of mixing.
And when it comes to mixing, like the benefit to synthesizing a sound would be so that you can turn up, different components of it, like in the very smallest of parts, like the way that Justin did it. Like he could turn up, the first shape, the first wave, that first sound had three like sound waves going on. He can adjust those and make tweaks. Whereas if you were to just record a projector or something, you're basically stuck more or less with the completed sound that you've already recorded, and that's not necessarily bad. There's many pros and cons to the different methods. I will say nowadays, I would say the latter, or the way that Justin did it, is used a lot more than it used to.
I would say that just that whole bit that you just went through is like picture perfect, absolute. Yeah, just nails the explanation to tell a student, right? When we have students coming into our school, basically, we want to impart upon them that when you are recording, let's say you're recording a musician or something, what you record is what you have now. So your preparation really counts for a lot. You want to make sure everything is set up the way it needs to be set up and everything is being captured the way it needs to be captured. Don't break everything down until you're sure. And that goes for if you're in the field for creating sound design. If you really know I need to get this sound, you should make sure, if you can, you take the extra time to get the exact capture that you want, because you might not get another shot at it. Whereas when you're using something that is like a piece of studio equipment, like a synthesizer, or maybe a piece of software like a virtual synthesizer, right? So just one that lives in your computer and doesn't exist in physical space. Okay, well, then you can go back and you can make changes later on. And there's a pro and con to both of them. The pro of recording something is that once you've made that choice, you don't have to worry about that feeling of going back and second guessing yourself. You made that choice. It's done, and you can move on with your life now and just make it as good as you can make it. But the
Yeah.
con is if you want to go back, you can't. And then when you have studio equipment, like an analog synthesizer or like some kind of piece of software, well, the pro is you can go back and make any changes that you want to make, but the downside is you can get stuck in indecision and you can go back and revise and revise and revise and never get anything done. So it's a really interesting time to be a sound designer because both techniques have a great deal of merit, and it's kind of a matter of personal preference and what the situation calls for.
And budget, and it's kind of like making all of your food from scratch, or just like making the sauce and just buying the pasta, or whatever, versus like making your own pasta. Like it's control, it's the degree of control and everything. Anyway, yeah, not to keep belaboring that point, but yeah, I think we explained that. But one other thing that I wanted to mention was, um when it comes to we haven't talked about the swinging.
Of course. So I did all of this synthetically, and the thing that is really cool about that Dr. Mix video, and that's really cool about the Ben Burtt video, is you see them swinging a shotgun microphone in front of a speaker, as we said, to create the Doppler effect. But I was thinking, well, what if you're a young person and you are maybe not like able to afford that kind of equipment, and you would like to be able to kind of get that same sound. And so I was walking through the hallway at the school, and I was just like doing lightsaber sounds to myself. I was trying to not do it too loud because I didn't want people to laugh at me, but I was just kind of trying to think about what are they like at the core when they're moving. And I just thought, well, if it's a Doppler effect, it just needs to get a little bit louder, and the pitch needs to move up as that happens and get a little bit quieter, and then the pitch needs to move down as that happens. And so basically I've got that simulated here. So we'll turn our lightsaber back up here and take a listen to just the idling. And now I'll click a few buttons to make it sound like it's in motion. And what those buttons are going to do that I'm going to click, and if you're listening online, you won't be seeing this. But the point is, what I'm going to do is turn up the idling sound and click a few buttons. And upon clicking these buttons, it will move the pitch up at the same time that it moves the loudness of the sound up. And then it will move the pitch down at the same time that it moves the loudness of everything down. So let's take a quick listen. Now, a few of those I think were more successful than others. Some of those movements are a little bit crude. But the point is, you can simulate a Doppler effect synthetically as well. The fact that we have software that can do it, that you can purchase, is proof of that.
Okay, I want to take a step back. So even if you don't care about making your own sounds, personally, I'd actually like I think I would like be so intimidated to even approach this. And I know a thing or two, like not as much as Justin, but I didn't know some stuff about how to make sounds. But like I would just be very intimidated to even try to make that. But you can still gain something from this, from these explanations. And something that I do think that is worth naming is the things that are being modulated, like changed, basically. The things that are changing are amplitude and frequency. As always, correct me if I'm wrong, but
no, you got it.
When Justin is talking about volume, that is amplitude. Consider that amplitude. And the reason I really want to drive this point home is because when we think of like making things more or less, there are just so many different parameters that we could be talking about, and amplitude and frequency tend to be ones that get really mixed up. And then when we add in words like pitch and notes and stuff, it gets very confusing. But those are actually like on separate axes. You can make amplitude, aka volume, higher, and frequency, fundamental frequency, lower. They don't have to be together, but in this Doppler effect, they are going together. You get closer and it gets louder and higher, and the amplitude and frequency are getting higher, and whatever, the opposite is true too. So
totally.
Yeah. So frequency is like, how would you describe amplitude? Is okay. If we're thinking about like waves, why am I doing this?
No, here.
Amplitude is the okay, great.
I got you covered. So here's our idle hum. Can you still hear my voice okay?
Oh, cat bomb. Sorry. Yeah,
that's okay. Hi, kitty. So I'm going to move only the frequency.
Yeah. And so the way that some people would describe that is like the note is getting higher, the pitch is getting higher. And that's because what we perceive as pitch is essentially whichever the fundamental frequency is. And that just means like the lowest frequency, basically the main frequency that we're perceiving out of frequencies. Because even things that do not sound like they have a note attached to them, like if I clap my hands, you would say that doesn't have, there's no note to that. There's still like a lot of frequencies. It's just, it's not as clear which one is like the leading frequency. But there's still a lot of frequencies. Even when I play a note that is mainly perceived to be at one frequency, there's still a lot of frequencies all across the spectrum happening. So, yeah.
So yeah, frequency and amplitude, super important. Super important. Like when we talk about sound design, I very rarely actually use the word pitch, and I very rarely
Yeah.
use the word volume because
Same.
they are so subjective. So yeah, and we measure frequency in hertz, not as in my heart hurts. Hertz, capital HERTZ, hertz, and we measure amplitude in decibels, or dBs. And
Yeah.
so that's how we measure those things. And that's those very important fundamental tools when you are doing some sound design.
Yeah. So earlier this episode, when I said the lightsaber idles around at an F sharp to a D, I like kind of hesitated when I said that because that's not like really the point of it. But pitch is like it's like sort of a shorthand for like I don't know, I don't have memorized the numbers of hertz that is. So it is a way, like when people talk about pitch when they could talk about frequency, oftentimes it's not to say, oh, it's important to know that it's at an F sharp, because that's not the message that I want you to walk away with, like, oh, it's so cool, like let's unlock the mysteries of F sharp. It's like mainly just as a communication, like as a way to help place it for people. And yeah.
I used a detuned F sharp, by the way.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So there you go. So you nailed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, detuned, right? So that's another thing, is that we listened earlier to these three components of the synthesized projection sound. And when we listened to the first two of those in isolation, they sounded identical. But it's the relationship between the nuanced differences that really makes them move back and forth between one another. And so they might be the same quote unquote musical pitch, but they're not perfectly in tune with one another, and they're not exactly the same waveform. And because of that, they have this kind of relationship with each other that creates kind of a sense of idling.
Yeah. Where it's like, where there's movement, but it's not really movement. It's just that they're different. And okay, the way that I
Yeah.
have described this on the podcast before is it's like colors, like, but the shade of them is a little bit different. And so the shades kind of, to some people, they may think that is clashy. To other people, they may not think so. But either way, it's like they're almost the same, but they're slightly different. Like I'm wearing a red shirt right now, and my microphone cover is pink, and those are kind of almost related. Like they're like in the similar area of the spectrum, of the color spectrum.
Yeah,
But
there's red and pink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the same thing with pitch.
Well, prior to this, I was going to demonstrate, prior to us recording this podcast, I was going to demonstrate a flashlight method of controlling this synthesizer. But I wonder now if maybe since it is a podcast, if that would be not necessary. But the reason I wanted to just bring that point up is this: there is more than one way to do something, right? So if you hear a sound you like and you want to make that sound, there's more than one way to make it. You don't have to just do one way. People have made lightsaber sounds in lots of different ways. And, the way I wanted to make it was I got myself a little flashlight, and I did these things that I probably shouldn't get into here right now, but I did all these things in Max MSP software, and I told the computer to track the position of the flashlight and then like activate Doppler effects based on where it is. And do you need to do that? Absolutely not. The point is, that's not how Ben Burtt did it. It's the way I wanted to do it for fun. So I wanted to throw that out there because I know we're going to talk a little bit about how people can kind of recreate some of their own sort of sounds on their own.
Yeah. And I think that's a good summation of that. I was wondering if we could talk about like some of the finer distinctions between some of the different lightsaber sounds, so that if we're thinking about like something like, I'm just gonna play. Oh wait, no, that's the clip from these minutes, which I will play. But okay, I'm gonna play some of these ignitions again, and then maybe we can talk about like, even though they're all ignitions, what properties are different between like the first few. Or maybe what do they have in common? Like what I'm hearing is the beginnings of them is very like strong. Like the beginning is very punchy.
Definitely very punchy. And what I'm hearing is the kind of, I'll just describe it as like a noise sound, like that kind of a sound, right? What I hear is that sound always kind of is there for about the amount of time that it would take for the lightsaber to go from being like extending outward, right?
Mm. Oh,
That
that's a good
sound,
point.
that like kind of sort of noise, or kind of yeah, sort of almost a static sort of a sound, like a white noise sound. That kind of a sound is there. And in my head, when I hear each one of those, I see the speed of the lightsaber like extending out.
Mm. That's a great point. Which is why like um, I'm gonna play Luke Skywalker's green lightsaber in Return of the Jedi, and for a lot of people, it stands out as being one that like is so punchy, like it's so fast, like the way that we were talking about it last season with Kyle Katarn, is that it like sounds like it's really fully charged, like it's overcharged, it's like ready to jump out. Oh, well, that was it twice. Okay, now it's just on loop. Okay, that's a little bit annoying, I'm sorry. But yeah, so if you just think back to some of those, and um the different types of ignitions I think are interesting too, because in the original trilogy, I feel like there are like maybe 3 distinct sounds. And like the Darth Vader's is like, it feels very slow.
I have to say, I'm a little embarrassed because I thought that Luke Skywalker one, which is the Return of the Jedi one, and that was like my favorite. Uh, I thought that they had also used that for Palpatine at some stage,
Well,
but I might.
I think you might be right, because it I think the put it this way, like the lightsaber sounds aren't always really correlated with what you think they would be. I think, and that's the thing, is like, in my head canon, the sounds don't necessarily need to be attached to the specific lightsaber, because I think about like just the fact that things might be charged differently, or like I just things,
Oh,
and this is just my own personal way that I'm explaining this.
no, I
Um,
love that.
but
That
just
helps me so much because I always think about it like heroes and villains, and I was like, "Oh no, like why does
honest,
Luke and Palpatine have the same thing?" But it's like, "Oh yeah, right." Like because if you were all like charged up because you knew stuff was about to go down,
well, let me play
you
a
would.
clip of from Vader. Like you can hear the breathing in the background, but you can also hear that the lightsaber ignites kind of slow. Like it seems slower
Yeah.
and it's more hissy.
It's
Yeah.
it's interesting because the Luke Skywalker one feels, yeah, like charged up and ready to go, and then that Darth Vader one, um, so all on its own, it sounds pretty, it sounds slower, but then when you have the breathing underneath it, it sounds very intimidating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if it was faster with the breathing underneath it, I don't know that it would be quite as intimidating.
Oh, I totally agree. One of the things that I'll always remember from one of the acting classes that I took in college was like, um, the way that, like, if you're a scarier character maybe, or if you're playing someone who's maybe has the power in the situation, or whatnot, we were talking about levels and the speed of movement and things like that. And essentially, like, the more power you have in the situation and the more maybe manipulative you're going to be or whatever, usually though it's a good acting choice to like move slower and sometimes even just like sit down when others are standing. Basically, it's like the opposite of what you might think to be like faster and louder and more like big and whatever. Sometimes it's just like the more dramatically slow and just confident in what you're doing is sometimes like just the scariest thing.
Those slow turns in episode 3 at the when in the opera house when he's telling him
Yes.
that terrifying story.
Oh my God. Palpatine is like a master at like just the slow, like doing the slow thing. Like it's going to be on his time. All right. He doesn't need to scurry around for anybody. He doesn't need to have a excited lightsaber that we certainly can. And he
It's
certainly
just
does.
really weird because like, he's an older gentleman and you wouldn't think that that he could strike such fear in you, but because I don't know, I look at him, I'm like, I could probably take him, and then he delivers those lines, and I'm like, oh yeah, no thanks, I don't
No,
want any
no.
part of it.
Like, bye, bye. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Yeah. So can you explain 4 letters, or at least, the 2 that are easiest to understand, that think ways like words that we can use to describe the sounds that we're hearing, including lightsabers. And the ones that I'm thinking of are, of course, the ASDR sounds, like attack, sustain, whatever. Am I saying it right in the right order?
Oh,
Attack, sustain,
AD,
whatever. Attack, decay, sustain, release.
that's it, that's the one.
Yeah. So these 4 terms will take you pretty far in describing sounds that you're hearing, or at least, yeah.
So yeah, when we talk about how loud a sound is, or amplitude, when we talk about amplitude, um, we can break that down into different stages of amplitude. So, like in particular, we're talking about what is an envelope, an amplitude envelope, and I know that starts to get like, oh my gosh, we just said ADSR, we just said amplitude envelope, getting so lost. Think of it this way.
So let's
Imagine
just take
that,
the ignition sound, because it's not a steady hum. It has a different sound from the very beginning of it to the very end of it.
yeah. Well, I was going to say about ADSR, maybe I misunderstood. You were asking for like an explanation of ADSR?
Yeah, and I just said you can use the ignition as an example.
Oh, so what I was thinking of is imagine you plug a guitar into an amplifier and the volume is turned all the way down and you hit a string. Okay, no sound is coming out because someone has to put their hand on the knob and twist it up to make the sound go up, right? So if you want or a mixer might be an even better example. Imagine that you have a mixing console and you have like a volume fader. We all have a volume fader in our cars when we're driving.
Fader just
right?
means knob.
Yeah, like a knob or a fader, or a slider or a pot. They have many names. But basically, when you move that up and then back down, that would be considered an amplitude envelope. You would have just executed attack, decay, sustain, release. And attack is how fast did you move it up. Sustain is how long is it at that position. Or excuse me, decay, I apologize. So attack is how fast is when you move it up. Decay is how long is it going to take to come down to the point at which it will sustain. And then release is how slow is it going to fade away. So
Yes.
I don't know if that was too much.
Well, I think
But
I think attack is like probably the easiest one to understand because it's at the beginning. Or attack is how you described it, how fast it takes to get to its peak amplitude. Is that what you?
yeah. How long is it gonna take to get to the top of the amplitude envelope that we have?
Yeah. And the attack, if you just think of like, okay, if anyone is a musician and you've ever been told to like do, to pay more attention to your attacks or whatnot, that will often mean like the way that you're very first start, the way that you're starting a note. Like it's basically like the way that you start a note, basically. And a short attack or a short attack would be like you get to the point very quickly. Like it's more like I'm going to clap, so it's going to be a little bit loud. Like that's kind of like this is like a shorter attack than if I were, well, I can't do a slow clap. Well, didn't really think that through. If there were a way for me to slowly clap and you don't get the clap sound until like way later, that would be a slower attack. But yeah, I just think I confused it even more. But yes, okay. The ignition of a lightsaber sound, I would consider that a sort of a fast attack. What would you think?
I would say the ignition of a lightsaber sound is a very fast attack and a sharp transient, but we don't have to get into what that means.
Yeah. So what would be something with a slow attack?
A slow attack might be, well, I'm trying to think in Star Wars canon here. So I'm trying to think of, what has a slow attack?
Like a TIE fighter sound.
Yeah, if it's coming from way off in the distance, yeah, maybe a TIE fighter sound would be a good one. There's a lot of sounds. Last time you and I talked, we were talking about
the wind.
like wind sounds. Wind sounds that you hear might have a bit of a slow attack. If it's not a really super windy planet like Hoth.
Totally.
Right? But if it's kind of like just you're out in kind of a nice placid environment and there's some wind blowing around, those might have kind of a slow attack. They gradually get a little louder, and so that would be a slow attack. Yeah,
that's a very good example. And so when we're thinking about the speeds of lightsabers, I guess what I was trying to get at was like Vader's lightsaber has a slower attack than Luke's green lightsaber.
Yep. And I like I was saying, it's a lot more intimidating when you have the breathing underneath it. And then I think it's a lot of Star Wars is about creating an emotional context through the layering of sound.
That's a good way to put that. Yeah. I like that. Okay, so we could live in this world for a very long time, but let's what do you say we like keep it moving? And we can always like add more if we feel like we forgot stuff. But I think that was like a good I think we covered a lot of nerdy sound.
I think that was about as thorough as we could be with that.
With Doppler, we talked about the sound waves. We broke down the components of the hum buzz, and we talked about the different attacks of different lightsabers. The one that I haven't played yet is the one that is from these very minutes, and maybe I will play that while we transition to I think we're going to skip level 4 because we kind of already did it, which was level 4 was going to be the home experiments. But if you want to actually if you actually want to make these on your own computer and do what Justin did, then all those links will be in the show notes to Mr. Mix. Is that what it was?
Dr. Mix.
Dr. Mix. And then
I'm sure he won't be offended.
And then I also have other links in the show notes. I have one to the Lightsaber Sound Cookbook if you want to do that. But even if you want to do a more lo-fi version, or do components, you could try recreating the Clash with dry ice and a metal spoon. And I think that would be super fun. And you can also, just try recording things, and you can try the Doppler thing by yourself by just taking any sort of thing that sounds like a hum, playing it out of a speaker, and you can just take your phone, put it on a voice memo, voice record or whatever, and you can wave your phone recording, you can wave your phone while it's recording in front of the speaker, wave it back and forth like a lightsaber. And you could do that very easily yourself to get a little Doppler effect for yourself. Okay, we did level 4. Now we're in the final stage, which is the big picture and discussion. on the future of lightsaber sounds. And yes, okay. So I'll start this. One thing that I do want to say is whenever there are changes to Star Wars in any way, it's pretty cool that people notice. I mean, of course, some people might be really rude about it. Some people might like it. Some people might not like it. But my personal take is that it's not a bad thing if people point it out. And it's not a bad thing for people to have opinions on it, because it shows that, like, it kind of shows what things are important to people, and also which sounds stick, like which things, I don't know. I always feel like it makes me appreciate like just the subconscious level of wiring, like brain wiring or whatever that happens, that sound can really assist in our experience of things. And well, in the new trilogy, there have been a lot of new sounds, and also for episode 8, lightsaber sounds were re-recorded. This has been controversial, and I'm making it like sound so serious now. But but I actually think it's like really, really fun to talk about why they were re-recorded and what new opportunities that gives us, and like how they did it. Because if you listen to interviews that the sound designers for The Last Jedi have done, it sounds like there's a lot of joy in actually capturing of the spirit in that process. Do you have anything to add before we talk about that, Justin?
I think it's okay to try new things, and I encourage that. That's all I would have to add about that.
Yeah, and if you're listening and you do not like that, then that's, of course, totally fine too. But what we're here today to do is to talk about the logistics of why perhaps that is done sometimes, and like the pros and cons, which we have already talked about a little bit, to the different ways of capturing sound. And one thing that I do want to make sure is at the forefront is just the very real process of degradation. The way that Ben Burtt captured the original sounds, and just the way that the original sounds, not only sounds, but like even the way that the scores were recorded, like just even the technology that was in 1977 is not something that can just on its own be preserved forever. I don't really know the exactly like the process of the degradation, but it happens. And if you've ever like heard an old CD or like an old record or whatever, you've heard it too. And this has been a big problem. This has been a big like desire with like remasters and like re-releases of things, is to try to capture like a better quality, not just because they're tinkerers in Star Wars, well, they're always tinkering and whatever, but like literally for preservation of this thing that we love so much.
Well, I mean, if the physical tape is deteriorating,
Yeah.
then you're gonna have to do something else.
Yes, exactly.
It's pretty practical.
Yeah, and you can just try to just keep doing the old thing, but at some point it's literally not going to work anymore, and then with each iteration it's just going to sound worse and worse. So
I just feel like if the tape is deteriorating, that's a good time to see, well, okay, I'm going to have to recreate something from scratch anyway, right?
Yeah. And
and
I don't want to like make people think that it's like the original sound effects were just like they're almost about to die, like they're in a terrible state, because I'm sure they've done like all that they can to digitize them and preserve them and all of that. And I have no doubt like they've saved every, like I don't want to make it sound like it's that quite gloomy, but also the way that the sounds were captured was also not nearly like as high fidelity and in a way that I don't want to say matches because that's subjective, but basically the equipment is better now the way that things can be captured. And as we were talking about earlier, there is more of a level of control when you can at least make some of it on your own and store it in a more usable way. And if you listen to the original trilogy like super closely, or now that you've heard a ton about lightsaber sounds, you probably will be able to hear some more of the distinctions between the different lightsaber sounds. But basically, and Ben Burtt has confirmed this in interviews, like all of the lightsaber sounds in the first 6 films were based on that first recording. All of them. So there's actually, even though there's variety for sure, it's like all based on that original recording. And when it comes to the ignitions, there's like a few different versions. I should be responsible and play the one from these actual minutes. I was saving it and then I just saved it until I was like, oh, I could have done that earlier. I'm going to play this full clip so you can hear the very first lightsaber sound. It's worth it.
What is it? It's your father's lightsaber. This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon.
Oh, it's so good. That's the first time we hear a lightsaber. Anyway, so that one plus the Darth Vader one, which was the slower one, and then the fast action Luke one. I mean, those are basically the sounds. And as the Star Wars universe has sort of grown, and not only that, but characters are doing like really wild stuff now. Not just now, but I feel like Yoda in episode 2 really like opened a whole new world for me as a kid of like, oh crap, Jedi are like really flipping around now. Like what? So yeah, Ren Kleiss and Matthew Wood in an interview with the Dolby Institute, and I'll link to this in the show notes. It's an excellent interview where they get very detailed about sound design. They just talk all about the sound design of The Last Jedi, and they talk about re-recording the lightsaber sounds and how really like they needed more variety of sounds. And I think that really actually makes a lot of sense,
Yeah, I mean, I really liked what the sequel trilogy added to the lightsaber canon, and I'm glad that they did that. I totally understand if people feel like they shouldn't have done that. And I know that me personally, I still don't totally know how I feel about Ben Burtt not being included in the sound design process.
Yeah, me too.
But I had never seen that interview before, and I was really glad you sent it to me. And it really helped me to gain this perspective that, wow, the people working on this film are just really passionate about trying to do the best job that they can and honor the material that's already there as best they can and add something meaningful to it.
Yeah, and even okay, there's a lot of, to go back to like synthesis and like how to make sounds, which I mean synthesis, I think we could call synthesis like how the making of sounds, right? Like obviously there are many different ways to go about it, and one that I never really quite understood is, and I'm not saying that this is it, but like there are methods that are more like to try to recreate the way in which it was originally done. And so like the way that Justin made the lightsaber sound on his computer and all of that, that is not how like they recreated the lightsaber sounds basically for The Last Jedi and moving forward. Like they tried to use the Ben Burtt's methods. So they went about in the same way. They weren't just like, oh, we're doing everything on a computer now. So they let me see if I can look up my notes from the interview, but like, so they actually re-recorded like the television and all of that. And for the ignition, which we haven't talked about yet on purpose because I didn't know about the ignition sound until this interview because all of the Ben Burtt interviews that I've found, at least, talk about the hum and the clash.
Right.
And meanwhile, it's like, but what about the ignition?
I didn't know either.
Yeah. And so what they were talking about in this interview is, so Matt Wood, supervising sound editor, was like going back in their files, because they have like a library of sounds, and they found a file called Mae West. And that was where the original ignition sound was. And they were like, oh, how are we going to recreate this sound file? Is called Mae West. Like, what the hell is Mae West? And so they figured out that it's the sound. It referred to the sound of a life jacket being like ignited, basically. So because there's like a CO2 cartridge in both sections of the life vest and of the life jacket. And they open up and they figured out like the way that they can get that sound out of that life vest, which was like one person has to stand on top of it, and like it's a whole thing. So I really wish I was at this recording session, but the way that Ren Kleist described it is, let's do that again, but let's do it with 192K recording and high-res recording equipment and Myers sound phase. See, I don't even know this. And Myers sound phase adjusted subwoofer playback. And let's get the entire team to do it. Let's get every single person who's working on the movie to do their own. So they basically had a big lightsaber sound recording party with the crew. And they went to the scoring stage and basically like all got to record lightsaber sounds. I'm getting chills because like I wish I was there.
Well, the other thing is all that other stuff described, recording. What rate did they record at? What was the number?
192.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. Yeah. It would
Why is that awesome?
Oh, really good quality is why that's awesome.
Yeah.
Usually that number is much lower.
What is the number low usually?
48 oftentimes.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
anyone listening out there, pretty simple. Higher number, better quality.
Yeah. It's like the picture is like 4K, or now people are doing 8K, 10K.
Yeah.
Visuals.
I kind of wish I was there too, not just because it would be fun, but it would just be really enjoyable to have like, because what was the subwoofer that they were using? Did you say?
Myers sound phase adjusted subwoofer playback.
Yeah, cool. All of this would be a very enjoyable time on multiple fronts, I would say.
If you're a nerd, no one listening to this podcast at the 2-hour mark is a nerd.
Yeah.
So that happened, and that allows them to have more variety in their lightsaber sounds moving forward. And in a way, by not preserving the original, or it's not that they didn't preserve it's just by not relying on the same original recordings, that sort of ends up capturing the spirit of what a lightsaber and what the sound was created to do in the first place, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense.
Yeah. But other things that I hear are, and a question that I've seen is, what's the difference between Foley and sound effects?
Oh, it's a great question. So sound effects don't necessarily have to be created through the Foley process.
And what is Foley?
Foley would be, let's say that I have a character who is walking through sand. And if you're recording a movie on set, like on-set audio can be problematic because it may not always come out so great. So then what you would want to do is in the studio, you would play the video of the person walking through sand, and that would be on screen in a recording studio. And then on the floor would be a bunch of sand in a pit, what's called a Foley pit. And then there would be a person probably using their hands, kind of like, making the footstep noises with their hands in the sand somehow, or making it in some kind of a way. I'll give you a great example of Foley could also be like leaves. If you hear leaves in a movie, it's very likely that somebody is doing leaves in the like moving leaves in the studio. My favorite, it's actually from an episode 2 behind the scenes featurette that I saw, was the sound of kissing is oftentimes someone kissing a hand, like kissing, their own hand. So George Lucas was watching the footage and turned to the Foley artist, and he asked her,
please
was
tell
that
me it's George Lucas kissing.
George
Okay.
Lucas asked the Foley artist and said, was that a hand kiss? And she said, yeah, that was a hand kiss, right? So people don't always understand just how ridiculous the sound making process is, the Foley process, the sound design process. Things get really ridiculous. So there's this person standing in front of a microphone watching Anakin kiss Padme on screen that is trying to time it just right and kiss her hand at it. She's kissing the Foley artist. She was just kissing her hand at exactly the right time, at exactly the right speed. That's Foley for you. Foley is you're trying to recreate some of these sounds on screen, but
And often
on your own.
and often a distinction is that Foley is performed. Basically, it's performed like to the picture. It's like synced to it's performed to picture, and like sound effects can just be cut to the picture. However,
Well, and the way I would look at a sound effect is, doesn't like I would never. I don't know about never. So look, I don't want to try to pretend like I'm some big movie sound designer. I'm not. I've done independent films, so I've never worked at that like Lucasfilm level, right? I've never been to Skywalker Sound, but me personally, and just the experiences I've had, I don't typically see anybody create something electronically and call that Foley, right? I've never seen that, right?
For
so sound effects, I guess my point is sound effects can be made purely electronically, right? And I would not say the same about Foley. Foley is, it's a performance and it's a recording of something you're doing in physical space.
And being a sound effects person on a team it sort of refers to the function that you have of putting sound effects in the picture. Whereas if you're a Foley artist on a film, that implies that you're going to be like making and performing these sounds. It's like there's overlap, but it's sort of a distinction in like where the job, like what exactly your lane is, and which is why people like Ben Burtt were really confusing, in that they did a lot, just hard to define unless you just made this category of sound designer.
I totally agree. He's such a completely unique person, and he was very, especially in the 70s. I mean, it was just hard to even conceive. I mean, he really changed how a lot of people viewed sound in movies. What I was also going to say about Foley is performing Foley is hard. I did
so hard.
I did it for like a little virtual. I was working at a company called Ball2 Studios. Now it's called Ball2 Technologies, and there was a virtual reality, like a short virtual reality, like little clip we were doing, and it's a movie basically, like a 3-dimensional movie. And there was the sound of this Muay Thai martial artist, or excuse me, the video was a Muay Thai martial artist, like practicing, and his feet were in the dirt. That's what came to me. His feet were in the dirt, and so my boss asked me to like perform Foley to match his feet sliding in the dirt, and it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe how hard it was. I thought this will take like an hour, but I had never done it before, and I was terrible at it. I was much better at doing the voiceover of him grunting when he threw the strikes.
that reminds me of another thing about the original trilogy is because of the nature of editing before like micro edits and when things were done more to real, I Ben Burtt actually had to perform like the sound design live, like 10 minutes at a time, basically.
That's horrible.
And and
I didn't know that.
yeah, I was watching this other interview with Matthew Wood and someone else, and they were talking about Matt Wood was talking about redoing the sounds for the various special editions and how like it would just he couldn't really conceive of like how much you'd be like sweating at the 9-minute mark, just like, oh my gosh, I have one more minute. Oh my God, can't just please let me just not mess up. And how like a lot of the things redubbed or redone in the special editions were like because Ben Burtt kind of made some maybe mistakes, not mistakes, but like maybe made, if he made something a little bit too loud, you can't really just take back that one. You can't just punch in that one like mistake. It's like you either do the whole 10 minutes again or let it be.
Yeah, I mean just the concentration you would have to get that done.
That would be such a harrowing 10 minutes. I feel like I would keep restarting like 30 seconds, but only if the reels were like limited. But if I was limited, then oh my gosh, have to keep pushing through. That's like a nightmare for me.
It's just really it's really interesting the way that films were made in compared to the way that they're made now. I was just teaching my students how to cut audio, how to just splice and fade in and fade out audio. I have an intro level class I teach, and they had asked me about just some of the terminology, like and some of the icons we were using Premiere Pro. They said, well, why is it a razor blade? And I was like, well, because you used to have to get a physical razor and you used to have to actually, and they don't know. And it makes perfect sense that they wouldn't know. And, the movie industry has just undergone so much change. And that's why talking about the lightsabers and that's why talking about Ben Burtt is really exciting to me, because this is somebody who really made a huge change. And the lightsaber sound it's such an iconic sound. There are so many sounds in movies, sound effects, there's Foley, there's sound design. There are so many sounds in movies. It's very, very, very rare that a sound is like identifiable in pop culture. It's like people know what it is just when they hear it, and it's like from a movie, right? Like that's just blows my mind.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about what the lightsaber sound could have been, or like what instead of a lightsaber it could have been. And like if you think of the sound of maybe swords, or maybe the sound of like ray guns, or things that are kind of similar, things that are weapons and kind of maybe have a few traits in common. And I feel like I go back to this at the end of every episode, but it also shows like the alchemy of having a team working on a film that has like, I don't know, a specific vision, and one where it's really, again, I'm trying to be careful because I actually do think a lot of people working on films have a vision, and so I don't know what makes this vision any better than other visions, but like just for whatever reason it worked in pop culture. And Ben Burtt didn't in isolation just create this cool sound. Like it did also stem from concept art, which stemmed from a story, and it stemmed from like George Lucas having this idea, and also like there's these other elements that it plays with, like the sound of the lightsaber also being in the context of like hearing the Force theme is like it's a whole thing of like all these things come together and elevate one another. It's if you just played something, context is everything to me. Like if you just played a lightsaber sound on the street without knowing the visual that it was attached to, the fact that something lights up at the same time as it's ignited, like if you weren't aware of all of that, then it would just be another sound. And likewise, if you a piece of music or whatever, but when it all comes together, oh my gosh, that's film. Yeah, that's like this multimedia.
I know. I think about that kind of thing all the time, because we give a lot of credit to musicians who perform, and we should, and we give a lot of credit to composers, and we should.
Well, we give a
But
lot of
there,
credit to the people who do the things that we think they're responsible for it, but
yeah,
everyone,
that's
yeah,
it.
it's
But
always
but
more than just that one attributed person.
that's exactly right. I mean, when I watch someone play piano, I of course think about the pianist. I of course think about the composer or composers or songwriters or whomever. But I also think a lot about what a spectacular feat of engineering the piano is. And when I think about the lightsaber sound, one of the reasons it just like astonishes me and blows my mind is all of the technology that had to be invented for this sound to exist, and all of the people and people who made technology, and you'd have no idea that it would ever be used to create a lightsaber sound, right? Like, who would have thought to record the back of a television? Like, even Ben Burtt didn't say, I'm going to go do this now. It was happenstance. It was serendipitous. And I think it's also, like you were saying, it's really important to keep in mind just how impactful the concept art was as well.
Absolutely. Yes, lightsabers are awesome. Sound design is awesome. Art is great. Isn't that a good way to segue
I
into the questionnaire?
That's okay. Here, I have a great way to segue into the
Oh wait, I
questionnaire.
do want to say one more thing. Oh my gosh, I forgot.
Go ahead,
I did an experiment myself, and it's like a little
please.
tidbit. Okay, if you've listened to the end of this episode, kudos to you. This is the longest episode that I've ever done on this show. And here's a little bit of trivia: is the sound of the lightsaber retracting is the sound of the ignition backwards. So
I love that.
I took here is um okay, here is the retraction of the blue lightsaber. So this is the retraction. And then I reversed the retraction, and that exact sound file, I reversed it. So hopefully this sounds like ignition.
Amazing.
Isn't that cool? Oh, okay, retraction and ignition. And you can hear, because the beginning, you can definitely sound like hear the reverseness, because the beginning of it is a little bit weird of the other ambience in the room. Bam. So
That's
cool.
it's such a simple but like perfect way to do that.
Exactly.
Right? It's like, oh, what's the sound for it going out? Okay, just take that and make it go backwards, and then we're done.
Exactly. I love that. I love the
It's
simplicity of that.
but it's nice, right? Because we got a little bit in the weeds with a lot of sounds. It's nice to find. It's like I feel like we were like way deep down in the water, like, and we were holding our
We
breath for
brought
a
it
super
back. We
long
brought it
time.
back with some
And
succinct
now,
trivia.
like, yeah, we're back on the surface of the water. Like, thank goodness.
Oh, but it's like kind of rare that like a sound put in reverse like actually sounds like it's not obviously a sound in reverse.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, because I would not have guessed that on my own, even though it's not really obvious. Yeah. So there's that. Okay. So Star Wars music. Oh wait, you said you had one more thing before segueing.
I didn't have a very good segue. I
Okay.
was just there was an awkward silence, and I was just gonna fill it with
Oh
my
my
idling
goodness.
lightsaber sound again.
Okay, well, let's move on to the
No, we'll skip to the
Star Wars Music Minute questionnaire.
yeah, please.
Okay. Justin, you're going to answer the same 3 questions as every guest. And the first question is, and this is lightning round. So even if you want to explain a lot, it's okay. Like, I know that it's weird that the first question sounds like it's going to be very hard to answer. Whatever. It's to see the aggregate of how everyone answers, and it's very fascinating. Okay, in exactly 3 words, what does Star Wars sound like? Please text me how I should spell that.
Okay.
Definitely haven't heard an answer remotely like that before. Okay. Number 2 is, what is something related to Star Wars music or sound that you want to learn more about or nerd out more about?
I would like to learn more about the Duel of the Fates orchestration.
Specifically the orchestration?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And number 3, what is a score or soundtrack you're fond of besides anything Star Wars?
iRobot. I love the score for the movie iRobot, and I love.
Composed by?
I'll just say 3 quick ones: iRobot, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1991, and Spirited Away.
Who are the first? Who can you say the composers?
Oh, sorry. So iRobot is Marco Beltrami. I'd have to. I'm intimidated to say Deprez's name.
Okay. Well, I will write it in the show notes.
But let's see. And then there. Yeah, sorry, I've stalled. I've totally ruined the lightning round.
John Duprez.
I probably am getting it wrong. But those, I guess, the Spirited Away and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles soundtracks, they're a bit more of a visceral response. Like, I actually really looked deep into the Marco Beltrami iRobot soundtrack, but those other two, just when I was younger and I heard them, just really made a big impact on me.
That's cool. All right. Well, thank you for answering the Star Wars Music Minute questionnaire. Where can people find you online, Justin?
You can find me at justinleokennedy.net. You can also find me at the in the commercial music and audio production program at Western Carolina University.
Awesome. And if anyone wants to follow Star Wars Music Minute, well, you probably already do if you are watching this or listening. I'm on Twitter at Star Wars Musmin, on TikTok and Instagram at Star Wars Music Minute. If you're listening to this, we're also on YouTube at Star Wars Music Minute, and it's on all of the podcasting platforms. Additionally, at the time of this release, I should already have listener voicemail set up. So if you want to leave a message, I will have a link in the show notes. It would be awesome if you could give me your best lightsaber sound recreation with your mouth. Just
please.
Yeah, please do that. Actually, please do that. Please call in with your lightsaber sound. Just nothing else. I mean, that's you can say more if you want, but anyway, yes, that's the challenge. And I will see you next week for minutes 36 through 40, continuing our way through Star Wars A New Hope, 5 minutes at a time, digging into the music and sound. It's been such a blast. This is the longest episode by far. And yeah, see you next week on Star Wars Music Minute.